All right, guys, this is Benjamin. I go by xBenJamminx on Twitter. I am at dailyrotosharks.com, and we are here with Dave Potts, aka Cheese is Good, two-time $1 million championship winner, and he is from Rotogrinders.com. And to show my support for Rotogrinders and how much I love them and believe in, I'm rocking my Rotogrinders.
All right, there you go.
So get you guys get you guys that promotion right here that I know you love, and I have no problem with. I love the guys over there. So, Dave, I wanted to ask you some questions about yourself, your history, your past, how you got into DFS, and we'll take it from there. So, where are you located? How many years have you been playing? What was your profession before this, and how'd you get into it?
Okay. I live in Auburn, Alabama, and War Eagle. And if there's any Alabama fans watching, we can just turn that off.
Nice. That's funny.
Yeah. So I've been playing DFS pretty much since it started, 2008. Just for the first several years, it was a very casual part-time hobby. I was a serious season-long player, still am. But that's how I started. I started playing season-long in 1999 and started playing sort of high-stakes leagues like the NFBC and things like that in the mid-2000s, and have been doing that ever since. I didn't start playing DFS seriously till 2014. And before that, my full-time job, I was a traveling musician. I was a acoustic singer-songwriter. And I would drive around the country playing coffee houses and folk festivals, and that was pretty much my life before fantasy baseball.
Awesome. So, how did you transition from being a musician to DFS and specifically MLB?
So when I started playing season-long fantasy baseball, that was like 1999. I fell in love with it immediately. Sort of the marriage between the numbers and the game. Like, I was really hooked just playing a league for free with some friends. Yeah. Goofy little 10-team league. And I just absolutely fell in love with it. So basically every year I would just play a little more and a little more. I went from 1 team to 3 teams to 10 teams to 20 teams. And I was like, well, I should play for, instead of $20, I should play for $100. Now I should play for $500. And just so every year it just sort of piled on top of itself. And I got more and more into it.
So were you doing 20 $100 teams, $500 teams like that?
Yeah, just every year it just got bigger in both the number and the entry fee. And we had kids that I'm married, and we've got kids. And sometime around the mid 2005, 2006, I was getting a little tired of traveling because it's pretty much I was on the road really full time. So I'd been wanting to slow down with the traveling and stay at home more. So it was kind of a natural transition to, well, let me see what happens if I really try to make sort of like a part-time job money out of fantasy baseball. Right. So I started doing that with season long. And then when DFS came along, the first time I ever heard the concept, I mean, I thought it sounded like something I knew I would like to do. This was just baseball at the time. I didn't play any other fantasy sports. I was never, I didn't play season long football or anything else. So I just started with just the baseball. And, in the early days, there wasn't a lot to do. I mean, there were small tournaments, small number of players. So it was very much just a part-time hobby. Some days I'd remember to play, some days I wouldn't.
What sites did you start on?
The very first site was called Fantasy Sports Live. As far as I know, that was actually the first site in the whole industry. If not, it was one of the first. And then that next year is when FanDuel came out. And, there were several other early ones. Those are the first 2 that I remember being on. And then what got me into it, sort of the next step up, is so that the main season-long leagues I play are the NFBC, the National Fantasy Baseball Championship, and they do live drafts in Vegas every March.
So that's where you were?
So I was in Vegas in March of 2014, and FanDuel came out and sponsored the NFBC, and that was right when they announced the first $1 million tournament. So we were in Vegas, and the FanDuel guys were there, and they said, so we're, stepping up our game this year. We're going to have a live final in Vegas, $1 million first place. And that's when the light bulb sort of went off, like, oh, I should maybe go more full time and like take this more seriously, play every day, get a bankroll, figure out a plan, figure out what I'm doing. So I basically sat down before that season and figured out a plan of, a real serious bankroll strategy, which is something I hadn't ever done before when it was just casual, with the goal of, I want to play for this qualifier, but I also want to play, these cash games. And so that was what got me to take the step up into DFS. And
so tournaments right away where you're calling.
What's that?
Tournaments right away where you're calling. That just spoke to you right off the bat.
Yeah, and I still played more cash games then, just because I see the chalk first. So I really feel comfortable making cash game lineups, but I did see the potential in the tournaments when they started raising these prize pools and started figuring out game theory. It made a lot of sense to me. And then, so that is when I got into it full time. It's 2014.
Cool. And so that $1 million tournament that you first won. Now, can you give me a little insight to, waking up that morning, and how were you anxious? Were you confident? And how many people were there for you to beat?
That was a very weird experience. Yeah, I was certainly not. I'm never confident. That's kind of one of my things. I guess it works for me. Like, I always assume everything's going to finish right in the middle. That's always my assumption. And I'd never been nervous making a fantasy baseball team before. Like, why would you be? I guess, right? But yeah, that day it was. I think there were 70 people in that final. We were at the Cosmopolitan in Vegas. It started at 4 o'clock out there, and I was making the lineup all day, really all week. And around 2 o'clock that day, about 2 hours before lock, is when it really hit me, like, this one lineup is actually for $1 million. This is kind of a big deal. And then I started kind of getting a little tense, and I was like, I had my lineup set about an hour ahead of time, and I just kept staring at it like I was about to mess with it. I was like, oh, what if I did this? What if I did this? So I left the room. I was like, I'm out of here. I went down. I got a smoothie. That's the $1 million ticket right there. Is a smoothie.
What kind of smoothie you get?
It was a strawberry banana.
Oh my God, that's my favorite. All right, so I guess I have to drink one of those every morning now.
It's a good idea. It's a good idea. I could do a whole video show about what food to eat for different kinds of tournaments. It really has a lot to do with that.
Extremely interesting. I'm obsessed with food, so I think that would be great. What kind of food pairs with what kind of hitters?
Yes, it's an important, often overlooked thing about DFS. And so, yeah, I finally talked myself out of messing with the lineup. Like, I was sure I had it. I liked the lineup I had. But it's hard not to play around with it. You can always,
of course.
And that's a lesson for every day, every lineup. You can always, well, what if I flip these two guys? Well, I like that other guy. I mean, at some point you got to just make your stand and play who you play.
Do you remember if you did like a 4-on-4 stack with a cheap pitcher? Did you pay up for pitcher and find elsewhere? Like, do you remember the specifics of that day?
Yeah, it was. I did a 3-3-2 with David Price as my pitcher. So I did not pay down for pitcher. He was. It was actually an interesting day because Price was facing Felix Hernandez that day, and they were by far the two best pitchers, and they were going against each other. So that was kind of the big decision.
And so did you see a lot of people go Felix?
I think more people went Price. He was at home. And that year, 2014, the Tigers were considerably better than Seattle. Right. So it was close. If I recall, it was something like 20% for Price and 10 to 15 for Felix. It was.
All right. So it wasn't a thing about ownership and finding the lowest owned pitcher because, you found one that's reasonably owned, especially for a tournament. You don't usually want someone over, I guess, 10%, you would say, but that worked for you, right? And did you find lower ownership in the stacks that you used, or how did that work out?
Yeah, I never considered worrying about ownership for the pitcher. On FanDuel, one pitcher, I just want to take the guy who's going to get the points. I mean, if there was a guy that I knew was going to be 60% owned, then sure, maybe you think about that. But for the most part, if I'm doing one lineup on FanDuel, I'm just going for the pitcher that I like, regardless of ownership. I'll worry about that with the hitters. And that's what I did with hitters. I didn't use Coors Field hitters that day, which right there, you're automatically not chalky.
That was a Coors day?
Yeah.
Ooh, and you went against it.
So apparently you don't know what happened that day, Ben.
No. I definitely looked into it maybe like a year or so ago, but I haven't looked into the specifics. I didn't watch it live. So
yeah,
this is all kind of new to me.
Most other people know what happened that day, and it'll ring a bell when you hear it. That was the day that the Coors Field water main burst and the game got canceled.
Oh my God. I didn't know that happened on the live final day.
That's the all-time ultimate fade right there. Fade a game and have it not even play.
So that game just canceled.
Doesn't even have to go low scoring. It can just not play it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow. What a day to fade.
So that was just the craziest thing. And obviously lots of people stacked Coors Field as you should. So yeah, the top, me and the guy who finished second and third all had no Coors players.
Wow.
And it would have been quite a finish if Coors had played. There were a handful of teams in the top 10 that had 4 and 5 Coors guys, and they were 20 to 25 points down, that was before in the old scoring. That's a lot of points, but not unsurmountable.
Right.
Insurmountable. That's a word. So yeah, it would have been much more nerve-wracking had that game played.
A lot more intense.
If it had played and been a 12-10 kind of game, I might have gotten past.
Right. See, yeah, I remember hearing that, there was a Colorado fade, but I didn't know that the water main actually broke that day. So break of a lifetime, and I wouldn't. That's awesome. It was
crazy because we were in the room, and they had a bunch of TVs up, but the sound wasn't on. And off in the corner, they show outside of Coors Field all this water going up. People just kind of looking around. Nobody really knew what was happening.
Mm-hmm.
I think people outside of the room knew before we did. There started to be like a slow murmur, and everyone's checking their phones, like, what is going on with that? It was really bizarre.
So was there ever a point where they thought that the game was going to continue?
There was a point before that nobody seemed to know, because there wasn't water inside the stadium. It was all outside. But what happened is they couldn't use like the restrooms and the sinks and the concessions. So they decided to cancel the game, but we didn't know for a while because it wasn't clear. I mean, this has never happened before. This is incredible. We know how to deal with.
That's incredible.
Yeah,
that's like the Super Bowl lights getting turned off, except the game actually stayed off.
Yeah.
All right, so Dave, at the Rotogrinders conference where we met, I sat in on your MLB GPP talk, and I actually have a bunch of notes. So I wanted to go over a couple of them. I don't even know if you remember exactly what you talked about in that speech, but there were some things that definitely stuck out to me. So, I've been trying to do one lineup across the board. It's been good. It's been bad, but it hasn't been as fun as I would have hoped, especially when it comes to, sweating down tournaments and having multiple angles on things. So the first thing I have written down here is pay attention to payout structure to figure out how many different lineups to play. So when you're considering, all right, a lot of the people I know, they'll do the $2, the $5, and the $10 tournaments. And, most of the people who follow me who are still learning, that's kind of the range that everyone sits at. So what do you mean by pay attention to payout structure to figure out how many lineups to play?
So when you look at the tournaments in any one price range, just say you're looking at the $5 tournaments, there's going to be one that's just tremendously huge, 10,000 people with people entering hundreds of lineups. And there's going to be a single entry one, and there might be one that has somewhere in the middle. And I think some people just sort of get used to entering one particular tournament without really looking and thinking about where do I really need to finish in this to make it worth my time to do these every day. Because some of them are, if you don't finish in the top 5 out of 10,000 people, it's barely better than playing a double up. In which case, I don't know why you would really enter one lineup in that most of the time. Whereas there might be tournaments that are flatter payouts where you can finish 200th and make 7 times your money. So I just have found in talking to people that most people don't actually really look at the payouts. They only look at the number, the amount it costs to enter, and what does first place pay, and oh, that sounds fun. And so they enter it. But you should really look at, where do I need it? What happens if I finish in the top 10% but not the top 1%? Because sometimes you're really better off entering a bunch of 50-50s at that point,
right?
Depending on what your lineup feels like that day. If you have a chalky lineup, it's not super upside guys. There are tournaments that it really doesn't make sense to enter.
Okay, so a good example of that is a couple of nights ago, I was in a $5 rally and a $5 100-man league with the same lineup.
Mm-hmm.
In the rally, I won $30. In the 100-man league, I came in second and won $75 with the same lineup and the same entry fee. So, you know, with that, I was looking and I was like, wow, I would have really had to do so much better in that rally to get the kind of money that I made in the same 100-man entry fee. So when it comes to that, you know, those have three max entries in those. So would you recommend someone who's, you know, hoping for a big score but doesn't see it as realistic unless they get lucky, would you recommend them playing like 3 entries into the 100-man league over like the 3 entries into a $5 rally?
I would, because it's just so much more realistic to finish first out of 100 people.
Mm-hmm.
If you sort of make a commitment to that kind of tournament and you're a good player, you'll win that a couple times in a season, if not more. Like, you could be a great player and make great lineups every day and never ever finish first in a 5,000 person tournament for years without even doing anything wrong. Whereas a 100-man tournament, if you're making solid teams, you're going to hit that some days. So, and that's not to say don't play these bigger ones. I just find that people have unrealistic expectations and think that this one lineup is gonna hit it. And again, some of them you look at and say, well, if I finish 25th, that's still, I'm very happy with that payout. That's reasonably worth playing for. Then that's fine.
All right, cool. And the next thing written actually transitions well with this. So it's, if you don't multi-entry, play the highest money value tournament that you can. So, you know, you would recommend, instead of playing $5 lineups, you would recommend doing like a $25 entry or something like that?
That's especially true for qualifiers, even more so than tournaments, where you have to finish first.
Okay.
It's first place or nothing in those, basically. In tournaments, again, it depends on why are you playing? Like, that's even taking a step back from all of it. Like, a lot of people don't make sort of a big overall goal of what am I really trying to accomplish by playing DFS? Is my goal to grind out a slow, steady profit over time, or am I playing for fun? I want to have a big day and I want to hit a big one. If you're just trying to hit that one big tournament, I really think your chances of doing it with a fewer number of entries is so much better. So yeah, I would rather put 1 entry in a $100 tournament than 4 entries in a 25.
Okay.
Because there's so many less people. You can beat 400 people in a day. You don't have.
Wait, hold on. I think you got muted real quick. Is it good? I think you're showing.
Am I back now?
Yeah. Okay. Good. It like lost sync for a second. All right. Sorry. Go on.
That's okay. Yeah. So the playing higher dollar entry with fewer entries makes it more realistic that you're going to win one, just because beating fewer people is obviously easier than beating more people.
Of course.
The thing to watch out for with that, though, is if you're somewhat of a contrarian player, like if you like to find the off the wall guy, it can be psychologically harder to actually do that if you're playing for even a little more money than you're used to. Like if you normally play $5 tournaments and you say, you know, I'm going to fade Coors and fade Toronto at home, and I'm going to play Chris Bryant at third base today against a righty, even though obviously Donaldson and Arenado are the play. And at $5, you're like, that's a great contrarian play. I'm going to do it. Then you decide to jump up to 25. And since that's out of your comfort zone, if you get there and think, I've got to play Donaldson. How can I not play Donaldson for $25? I don't want to throw my $25 on this off the wall play. Then that's too high, and you shouldn't be doing that. You have to be able to stick to whatever your strategy is. So for everyone, there's going to be a dollar amount where it just sort of gets uncomfortable, and that's too high, and then you got to back down. But you should find your own comfort level of where can you play and still make what you think are the right plays without sort of outsmarting yourself on it.
All right, so I get it what you're saying, and let me try to also reiterate it for everyone else. So if you're playing, you know, the $2 and the $5, and your strategy is to kind of go against what the chalk would normally be, and you feel like, okay, I've been doing well in these tournaments, now let me move up. When you get to that, you know, $10, $25, $50 range that you're not usually comfortable with, you're going to be thinking about plays that may have been, you know, plus EV or optimal in that $5 range that you're giving your own $5 to. But now that you have $25 riding on this one lineup, psychologically, you're going to think, all right, well, I need to go a little bit more chalky because it's a better matchup, and I don't want to be as contrarian with the higher dollars that I'm putting in.
Correct.
Right. So I like those points. And how do you think psychologically you can maybe not force yourself, but let's say, you know, someone's been running good, they just won a few $100s, and like, all right, I want to put in an entry to this $50 single entry. I usually will, you know, look at a couple stacks here and there. Like, do you think there's merit to changing the way they play because there are smaller players? Should they go a little bit more chalky? What is a general way to kind of look at the higher dollar ones?
So there's not a totally correct answer to that, because when you go to the higher dollar ones, you do see more chalk played. Like most people play that way. So I don't know if you can say that makes it correct, because if you think about it as looking at an off the wall play, let's say that, again, you've got a Coors game, you got a Toronto game, you got a Yankees game at home, you got a Cubs game at home, and for some reason you like the Mariners today, right? The Mariners are going to be very underowned. There's all these other teams. So in something like, you know, the Grand Slam on FanDuel, 10,000 people, even something as off the wall as the Mariners is going to have 50, 100 people with a Mariners stack, because everything gets stacked in those huge ones.
Right.
Well, if you go up to the $1,000 entry, there's probably going to be 0 Mariner stacks, because there's going to be 50 or 60 people in this, and everyone plays more chalky in those. So you've just gone from, you know, even if you're right on this off the wall stack, you still got to beat 100 people in your other spots. To, if you have the guts to play that in the 1,000 and the Mariners go off, you pretty much win, guaranteed, because you're it. It's you and versus nobody with that Mariners.
Right. Yeah, that's very interesting.
And so that's why I say there's not a correct answer, because if everyone else is going more chalky, yes, you can go more chalky too, and you only have to maybe beat people in a couple spots. Like maybe all you have to do is put Nelson Cruz in there with a chalky stack rather than the whole Mariners team. But if you feel good about something like that, the fewer entries you have, the more you're going to be by yourself on that play. Or if it's a cheap pitcher, same kind of thing.
So thinking about that, and I actually have the next thing on this list, transitions as well. But when you think you have a stack that's going to be just low owned in general, is it just better off, if you're really at least confident in that, is it better off saying, all right, instead of me trying to stack this 5 ways in the $5 and try to hit on other spots, should I just pay up for a $25 single entry and just go with it, knowing it'll be a lot lower owned on that one team that I make there? Is that something you think would be optimal?
Yeah, I think for that one, it depends on that day's pitcher slate. Like if the thing you like is the stack, right? And there's just one pitcher that you're sure is the guy you want to go all in on this pitcher, then I would just do it once in that bigger tournament. But if it's one of those days where you've got 7 pitchers that you're tossing coins and like, I don't know which way to go. In that case, I would spread it out and say, I don't want to lose my Mariners stack because I picked the wrong pitcher. So let me do one with Strasburg and one with Sale and one with this cheap guy and one, So that really depends on your confidence level in the rest of the lineup.
So strategy has to be flexible depending on the slate and the pitchers and the amount of people that may be on a certain stack, whatever. You have to at least reasonably change up your strategy based on whatever slate and how many games you're playing, stuff like that, right?
Yeah, you can't really just say this is the way I play,
right?
Because every slate gives you something different to look at.
So the next thing we have is, ties into this when it comes to thinking about stacks and contrarian and game theory and stuff. And so the next thing that I have here is, if your core is low owned contrarian, play that with obvious value and chalk. And if your core is high owned, find high upside contrarian plays to go along with that stack. So would you recommend that more for, is that the qualifiers? Is that a general strategy? How do you use that?
That's pretty general overall. Like if we go back to I don't know why I'm on the Mariners today. We'll just say that's the thing. So if you're on this bizarre Mariners stack and you think nobody else is going to be on it, and you've got 3 other spots to fill, there's no reason you have to avoid the chalk in those spots because your lineup is already different. Like if you can afford Donaldson at third base and he's the chalk, but you agree with it and you like him, then you can play him and you've still got a contrarian lineup even with the obvious best play of the day. So I don't think you need to, and that goes for really any kind of tournament. Okay. And so on the opposite end, if you're in a bigger tournament, if you are doing the $5 entry with 10,000 people and you're stacking the Blue Jays and you think everybody else is, you want to be different somewhere if you can.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So if your core is high owned, right? So you have all these players that you like, but at what point do you think, okay, they may be too owned for me since this is baseball, anything can happen? Is there a point of percentage you try to shoot for when it comes to playing players, might be high owned, or a stack that might be high owned? So what's that like kind of boundary for you?
It is. It's really hard to actually figure out an exact number. Like you can gauge like this guy's going to be high owned, this guy's going to be low owned, but you can't narrow it down. I don't try to say this guy's going to be 37.2% owned. Like, no, you don't know that exactly. But generally speaking, if I ever think someone's going to be anywhere near 40 to 50% owned, which there are times when they are, as hard as it is to say, no matter how much you like the guy, there's really no reason to ever play any baseball hitter at 50% owned, ever, regardless of the matchup.
Okay, so what about Bryce Harper in Yankee Stadium against their 8th pitcher and everyone else is hurt, and he's at a reasonable price? Are you playing him no matter what?
No, that's the thing. It's really hard not to do that. There are matchups like that. If I think he's going to be 50% plus, which there are situations where a guy like him would be, it's so easy for the best players to fail in baseball. It happens so often that you can't play someone that high owned. Now, again, I will say in that situation, if you just are positive he's by far the best play and the rest of your lineup is contrarian, it's fine to stick him in. But as a core play, I don't think you can use someone who's going to be that high owned in a tournament. And yet that's another reason why most people recommend playing cash games and tournaments, because if you're playing more cash games than tournaments, you're going to have Harper in all your cash games. So if he has a big day, you're still going to have him there It's not like you're going to be without him everywhere. It's just a difference of how you're doing your cash versus your tournaments.
So how on a normal night, a normal slate, let's say a 10-game slate, not too crazy big, but also not small. When you're talking about cash and GPP, how many lineups do you think you would make when it comes to devoting to cash, devoting to GPP and stuff like that? What do you think would be like? How many lineups would you put towards each one compared to the amount of money you're putting in? Is there something you go as a baseline, or do you try to figure that out each slate as you go on?
Are you talking number of unique lineups or how many contests you put in?
Right. So I know a lot of people who try to run one lineup across everything and head-to-heads, double-ups, triple-ups, and they leave them in tournaments. I also know people who will make a cash game lineup. Dad, take this. I know people who make a cash game lineup, and they'll make a few other GPP lineups. So will you make a lineup and put it in all cash? Will you make 3 lineups for cash and then just mix in GPPs? Like, how do you usually go about like lineup construction in terms of amount of lineups?
Gotcha. I'm usually a 1 cash game lineup guy. Sometimes something that I've never really heard anybody talk about. That breaking news on your show.
Breaking news on Daily Roto Shark.
Sometimes my head-to-head lineup is slightly different than my double-up 50-50 lineup. People talk about those as exactly the same, which I understand. But sometimes I will play for a little more upside in the double-ups. Very similar lineups, but they're not necessarily completely identical. But I'm almost always a one head-to-head lineup, one maybe it's identical or close 50-50 double-up lineup. And then I've usually got one lineup that is my single entry tournament, my triple up, or if they have a 5 times you know what I mean?
Right.
Quintuple up. That's
quintuple ups.
Quintuple. So I tend to make one tournament lineup that's for those, for any single entry. And I will also enter that in multi-entry tournaments if I'm multi-entering. So I've basically got a cash game lineup, a single entry tournament lineup, and then it really depends on the slate how many GPP lineups I do. I'll usually have 2 or 3 core lineups in a day, but I may enter any number of variations on that core. Like I might have 20 lineups, but it's really 2 core lineups, 10 different times.
With just kind of hedge them in certain spots.
Just a couple guys switch. Maybe there's 3 catchers that I like evenly at the same price, so I'll just do one with all 3. And I realize not everyone plays that many or has the bankroll to do that. So I'm fine with the idea of having that one tournament lineup, the one that would be the one that I enter in single entries. If you're a one lineup guy, just put that in everything, or maybe make 2 out of it and keep your core and just move a couple spots around.
And will you try to keep the same pitcher across all of these? Or let's say you have 2 identical pitchers, you like them both, you're using one in cash. Will you hedge in your tournament and use the other one, or will you just stick with the same pitcher, even though you like them similarly?
Yeah, on FanDuel, I'll more often than not just stick with the same guy, with the one pitcher. DraftKings, it's more common that I switch out the second pitcher, and unless there's 2 guys I'm just really sold on, I'll usually have that second spot, maybe 2 different guys that I try to split up.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah, because there are definitely times where I like, 2 pitchers. Maybe one is a little bit more elite towards the top side of the salary, and then one is more mid-tier, which I've actually found more success with mid-tier pitching lately on FanDuel. But so sometimes, I'll use the same kind of core, right? And let's say I have, a mid-tier pitcher and Bryce Harper, and then another lineup I'll have elite pitcher and I'll move Bryce Harper down to someone in the $3,000 range or something like that. Would you recommend doing that strategy, or instead keeping the same pitcher and then moving Harper down from the outfield and upgrading a third baseman or something like that?
As long as you like both pitchers, I think it's totally fine to have a pitcher in 2 different tiers on 2 different lineups. Because a lot of days that there's that super elite expensive guy that, a guy who has 15 strikeout potential that you really want a piece of, maybe Sale or Scherzer or whoever. But there's also a mid-tier guy that you're really high on. I think it's fine to say I'm going to make one with both of them.
All right, cool. So
I saw something in the chat. We got a chat question.
All right.
Now we're playing.
All right, cool. So Dave, do you prefer the single entry double up, quintuple ups, or the multi-entry ones?
So I'm personally I like the single entry ones way better. I think there's not as big of a difference as people make them out to be, but I think you should play them consistently, whichever one you do, because you should have the same long-term win rate. But if you sort of bounce in and out, like one day you enter single entries and the next day you put 10 in a multi-entry, if you happen to do the multi-entry one on the wrong day, then your whole cash game winning percentage is going to be skewed. So I don't have a strong preference towards one or the other as far as what I recommend to other people. I like the single entry, but if you're doing multi-entry, do the same number of multi-entry every day. Don't do 10 today and 5 tomorrow and none the next day and 20 the next day.
Stay consistent.
Yeah, because all you're trying to do in cash games is have a winning percentage over a long sample size. You get to 60, low 60s winning percentage. Then you're trying to keep that consistent over a really long sample. So the more you mess with what type you're playing or how often you're playing, the more likely you are to just accidentally hit the wrong day. And even though you're winning 65% of your days, your overall ROI could be down if you multi-enter on the wrong day.
Nice.
Does that make sense?
That definitely makes sense. And yeah, so when it comes to the quintuple ups, and you're really looking for not just to really hit that 50% line like you would in double ups. You're really trying to get that top like tournament percentile. I think it's what, like, is it 15% for the quintuple up, somewhere around there?
Yeah.
But the way you can correlate that is what he's saying, as in long-term goals, is in baseball, if you're a 30% hitter or a 300 hitter, you're basically almost a Hall of Famer career-wise. So that's how they like to say things. If you can be consistent enough in just hitting that often enough to keep an ROI positive, then play it consistently every day. But if you lose, 2 days in a row, on that third day you can hit and still be profitable in that, one quintuple up, just the way you're putting in your money. So don't get greedy is what he's saying, and think, all right, well, I didn't hit yesterday, so let me chase and double up and play a bunch more tomorrow. So stay consistent with the way you look at things long term, and even someone who isn't hitting 100% of their lineups, you can still be profitable if you just try and be consistent in your approach and the way you look at things.
Exactly.
So we have another question. I'm pretty brand new to MLB DFS and have only been playing GPPs. Do you recommend me to stop playing GPP and move more to cash games?
A big part of that depends on what the goal is. Kind of like I said, like if your goal is to figure out how to do this to grind out a profit, I wouldn't say stop playing GPPs, but I would say try to get to the point with cash games where you get comfortable with them to where you can enter more cash each day than GPPs. So that, because you're going to have a whole bunch of days where you get shut out in GPPs and win 0%. So if you can play cash to the point where it's sort of evening out your tournament losses on those, you'll go through weeks at a time, even if you're doing things right where you don't win anything in tournaments. So yeah, for new players, again, if your goal is to just find some way to make a long-term profit, I definitely think you should try to get into cash games. If this is more of for fun, it just adds some excitement to watching the game and you want to try to hit something, there's nothing wrong with that. As long as you are understanding that there's going to be some swings and you may go several weeks at a time without really hitting anything.
Right. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think even for people who play GPPs and play that style, I think there's always some merit in joining some of the cash games and just having some hedge there, because let's say you're in, you do a $2 tournament, you do a $2 double up. You can not cash in that tournament, but still cash in that double up. And so you're basically coming out even, and it's paying for your entry to get into that tournament. Now, if you're going complete boom or bust style, of course, you could still not cash in that cash game. But if you're playing the way that he's recommending, have some chalk in there, have some contrarian in there, then it's not a bad idea to also pivot with those cash games as well, or even just consider tournaments being, a triple up as a top 30%, or a 3-man league or a 5-man league where it's not the huge upside, but you're still making a cash lineup. So I definitely think there's merit in that. And so the next question, and this is definitely something that is a industry-wide question that everyone has. I still wrestle with this every day. When and how often do you stack, and under what circumstances would you get away from stacking?
Okay. So it's interesting. Every year, everyone sort of evolves, right? And it used to be that stacking was not super common, and you almost had to do it to win, right? Because people weren't sort of onto it yet, and the correlation is so big. Well, now there's nobody that plays that doesn't know about stacking and kind of know what to look for. So what you look for when not to stack is you look at the slate. Do you see a reason why the teams that are going to be stacked might not have a big game? And do you see another game that you see 10 runs being scored in? If every game goes 6-4 or less, you can really win without stacking, because not stacking is now the contrarian thing, because everybody's stacking.
Right.
So the thing you would look for if you're not going to stack is, do you think the chalk plays might not have the huge games? And a huge game means, 8 to 10 or more runs, usually is how I look at it. And right. Can I find some home runs from teams that are not going to be highly stacked? Like, the key to beating stacks is having a handful of home run players off of different teams. Like, if you get 4 players who homer that are not part of everyone else's stack, then you've got this advantage all of a sudden. And so to me, it really comes down to, do I think everyone's stack has a reasonable chance not to hit today? Which honestly, most days it does. I mean, right. Anyone can have a bad day. The Blue Jays get shut down every once in a while. Coors
They're
Field
almost leading in
4-1 every once in a while. I mean, these things happen. Yeah. So you have to have plays that you like outside of a stack that aren't just like random. Well, he's a power hitter and no one will have him, Right. But he's a power hitter, no one will have him, and this is why I think he's going to hit a home run today, because look at this particular split against this pitcher. I think there's a lot of merit to not stacking, especially in a smaller tournament. If everybody's going to be stacking, you're different automatically by not stacking. And if you take a full, let's say if it's a 15-game slate, some team somewhere is going to have a big night, usually. Mm-hmm. And if there's a 20,000 person tournament, a couple hundred people are going to have every team, whatever team it is, somebody's going to have them. But in one of these smaller fields, if a 100-man league, not all 30 teams are going to be stacked. So if the 5 chalky teams don't have 10-run games, then you're probably immediately at an advantage not stacking.
Or doing just smaller mini stacks and maybe picking 1 or 2 players from a game and 3 players from a game, and not doing the 4-4 stack.
Yeah, that's worth pointing out. Like, you don't have to just stack 4 or 5 guys to get some correlation with a team. You can do 2, 2, and 2. And
yeah, I do that all the time. Yeah. And a lot of times without even realizing. Like I'll be looking at, all right, this guy's a bum right-handed pitcher. He's going against the Royals, and I just happen to get Moustakas and like Hosmer in my lineup. And it's not like I'm looking to stack, but like these are the most optimal spots for these players, and why not use them together?
Right. Yeah. So just by definition, when you're looking through your plays, if you find this pitcher has trouble with left-handed batters, Well, you're going to have two lefties on that team who are good against right-handed pitching that you might want to use, not because they're in the same lineup so much as they both have good matchups, and it's just kind of a bonus that they're on the same team. And so yeah, you can definitely get away with not stacking. Because everyone's doing it, you're now the contrarian player not stacking.
Like Coors yesterday didn't go off.
Yeah.
There were two pretty decent pitchers in there. I'm not gonna lie, I definitely stacked Coors, in lineups because you have to have some exposure on any given night, unless you're really just shooting for the stars. But I found the no luck with that, and my 8 actually had a great game and shut him down. So that was very interesting. And something I have here about of hitters on the notes that I have is you say contrarian-wise hitters, you're looking for high-priced players outside of your stack that are preferably 2 home run upside or low-priced punts with high contact rates. So how do you figure, 2 home run upside compared to, looking for, 1 home run or, someone who can hit a home run or someone with power? How do you differentiate, 2 home run upside?
It's a little bit of a not real thing to just put a number on, to say this guy has 2 home run upside as opposed to just home run upside. But I guess what I mean by that is you could see a reason why every time this guy touches the ball tonight is going to go out. Like, these are like your Chris Davis type hitters who just have so much power that anytime someone like Chris Davis is going to be under-owned, he's a good tournament play because it doesn't matter who's pitching. If he gets a good swing, it's gone. Right. A Stanton, when Stanton is under-owned, it doesn't matter who he's facing. And a lot of times you can find these kind of guys in decent matchups, not facing great pitchers or terrible pitchers, and they'll be under-owned. Like, last night, Chris Davis was facing Chris Medlin in Kansas City. Sort of a middle-of-the-road matchup. They were the first baseman. He wasn't very highly owned. He homered because he can homer off of anybody. There's a lot of those guys that just sort of sit somewhere in the middle of all this. I'm going to stack these teams. I'm going to avoid these teams that just sort of go overlooked every day. And there's a lot of guys who have that kind of power in the majors that any of those guys being under-owned is worth a look.
Right, and that's a great example about Chris Davis because, yesterday I actually had notes here. Yeah, he was my number 1 yesterday for first baseman, and I used Adrian Gonzalez because he was at Coors. So Adrian Gonzalez didn't do well. Chris Davis had like 30 points or something like that. So, me, I'm just thinking, all right, I'm playing cash games with upside. I love Adrian Gonzalez's spot. He's been playing very hot. He's gonna be pretty much owned, but he's gonna be in Colorado, and he should be able to at least hit 1 out. So, if I was playing more tournaments, I would have been thinking, all right, I should probably pivot to Chris Davis, even though he's not in the best situation. But I probably would have found myself more on Rizzo, I guess, just because how hot he's been. But Chris Davis is that any night 2 home run upside, and same thing with like a Chris Carter, right? Someone who's just free swinging for the fences. So there's definitely some difference with a guy who you're looking for pop and contact to someone with a high swinging strike percentage, but also a high home run to fly ball percentage that could really get the ball out of there against a fly ball pitcher, let's say. So the way I look at things is usually through the stats because I don't know the players as well, or like I do now, but growing through the game, especially for newer players, I would look at things like this pitcher has, a high contact rate. He's been getting hit hard, and he's a fly ball pitcher in a batter's park. Then I would look for, all right, who has a good WOBA against this pitcher, who has, a good contact rate, who hits the ball hard. I kind of just pair those things together, and I end up just with good matchups and good spots. And a lot of the times I really don't think about ownership per se, but I come out with low-owned players just because of being led to research. And so something that I do a lot with baseball, and I'd love to hear your opinion on this, is I actually do my research before I look at the pricing. So I'll go in and look at all the different matchups and stats and everything based on just baseball and not the DFS aspect. So I'll look at, great matchups. And then when I go in and I see, well, this is someone I like and I had written down, and wow, he's only 2,600 today, I'm getting great value. But if I saw that same player, was at 4,300, I'd be like, all right, he's in a good matchup, but I also have this other guy in a good matchup and his price is way lower. So I actually try not to look at the prices first, so I can really just see value right when I start looking at pricing. What do you think about that approach?
Yeah, I think that's probably the optimal way to do it, is to do your own research, get your own rankings before you look at both the pricing and what other people are saying. Because then you'll get, where you think guys should be, and then you see the pricing, and then you start to see what ownership might be from looking at other people. Whereas if you do it the other way, if you listen to podcasts first thing in the morning, they're talking about these guys, then those guys kind of get thrown in your mind before you look at the stats. And then you look at the prices, and you pull some guys out from the pricing, and then you go look at the stats. Yeah, I think you do get certainly more led to the chalk that way. Mm. And there might be a value that you find that because no one else set him, or because it just kind of didn't look right on the page, you don't use. Whereas if you'd started your list and you come up with, boy, this is the play today, I love this guy, you'll probably be more likely to use him when you start from that angle. So yeah, if you're confident in your, what you do as a process, I think that's definitely the way to do it.
Yeah, man. So I definitely appreciate you saying that, because that's how I think I find a lot of my edge when I'm not really trying to look for low ownership, and I'm not going in like, okay, this guy's in third, he's in the third spot, he's in a great matchup, so I'm definitely playing him. I don't even see the batting order first. I'm looking at, all right, I know this pitcher's facing this team, I know this guy's on this team, and I look what will be the matchups from this matchup in particular. But one thing that I've been finding recently that has really swayed the way I look at things, and I think I need to change some approach, is late innings, right? So facing bullpens and relievers, and like Colby Rasmus had, I think, a grand slam in like the 9th inning the other night. So how do you look even further ahead past those 2 or 3 at bats that they might be seeing against that pitcher?
The bullpens is probably the most not probably, it is, I think, the most difficult aspect of DFS. Some people don't think about it at all. And some people really try to figure out what relievers they're going to be facing, which you can't really do. It's essentially, the way that I do it is, if we're talking tournaments where I'm going to stack a team, I'm assuming the only way I'm going to win is if this team goes crazy. And if this team goes crazy, I'm not going to have to worry about seeing the good bullpen pitchers. We're not going to ever see their closer and their setup guy, because my team's going to be ahead. Oh. So I essentially don't worry about the bullpen with my stacks, because every team has a bad middle of the bullpen. It's a totally different thing if you're facing closers as if you're facing middle relievers.
All right, so let me structure it differently then. It's not as much as I'm worrying about the bullpen, but I'm thinking the matchups and all the numbers that I'm seeing initially for this game are all based on the starting pitcher. So what happens if they do get to him early, he gets rattled, or Charlie Morton yesterday gets out of the game, or whatever it is. You're just preparing for a pitcher you're going to see 2 to 3 at bats. So I think there is definitely merit into looking into just bullpen strength at least, and saying like, all right, this is a great matchup. Let's say Kansas City Royals, and you have Chris Young on the mound. So you have a guy who can hit him well, but what happens when that elite bullpen comes in? That matchup just turns slightly worse as the game goes on, for the most part. Wouldn't you say, like, facing a bullpen that's better?
I think at the least you should have a list of bullpen rankings. Just a simple good bullpen, medium bullpen, bad
Right,
bullpen.
right. That's what I'm saying.
Yes,
right.
it's definitely, and it's a much bigger factor with guys who have huge platoon splits.
Exactly.
If you're rostering Adam Lind, it's a big deal to think about, is he going to face a lefty later? Because he'll either be struck out or pulled from the game. Whereas, if you're using Andrew McCutchen, you don't really care. He's fine against whoever. Because a lot of the values that pop out every day are because of these guys who are specialists against lefties or against righties. And as soon as that bullpen comes in, if the handedness of the pitcher is different, that guy's value drops off the table. So you have to be aware of those situations. Make sure when you're using one of these value plays, I try to factor in, if I only get 3 at-bats from this guy, do I still want to use him?
That's what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, I will essentially assume that I'm losing an at-bat from a guy with huge splits who's only in versus one-handedness of a pitcher. So for cash games, I look at that as if he's going to be playing less than everybody else. So do I still want him at that price?
Okay. All right. Great. Yeah. So I'm glad we definitely touched on that. I think there is some merit in just knowing just which are elite and which are bad. Because if you're playing Philly and you're getting a good matchup, you're actually probably getting a better matchup as the game goes along. And then like certain teams like that, where it's just like you don't really have to worry about it. But there are definitely teams where you have to think, I may only get this platoon 2 to 3 at bats or something. And going along with platoon, something that was something I was already doing unconsciously, something that you actually mentioned, and so something I took notes on is don't avoid bottom of the order hitters, right? But now I think there's a problem, at least and most of the discussion and questions have been from a FanDuel perspective because that's usually where I play. But when it comes to that, the scoring has changed, right? So there's no negatives, meaning the people who are getting the most at bats are strictly upside, and now they're changing the RBIs to be even more valuable, meaning not only will team stacks be more valuable because of that RBI and run correlation, but you're putting a lot more value towards the top of the order in general, where if I was stacking Toronto and like last year, a Colabello or Pilar would be at the bottom, I would have no problem throwing them into my stacks and they would kind of be lower owned. But now I'm thinking about how do I weigh the difference between the upside of those at bats in the beginning of the order and the potential low ownership I would find from getting a guy at the bottom.
Yeah, it is different. The scoring has changed things a little bit. The bottom of the orders thing is definitely a tournament and stacking strategy, not cash games. Even before, you want top of the order guys, and even more so now with no negatives and RBIs being bumped up. So definitely cash games, we're talking top of the order hitters where you can get them.
Right.
As far as bottom of the order guys and stacks, it really is not changing for me, even with the scoring and the outs, because when a team goes off, the guys at the bottom of the order so outperform their baseline. Like everyone is priced for their baseline performance, and the 2, 3, 4 hitters on a good team, their baseline performance is so good. That's why their price is what it is. And these 7, 8, 9 hitters are priced as 7, 8, 9 hitters, and their performance is going to improve in a big game to the same percentage, if not more, than what the 2, 3, 4 hitters are going to improve
on a
in that
value
game.
basis.
So on a per at bat basis with these lower guys, in the game where this team happens to score 15 runs, the bottom of the order guys actually see the bigger bump usually in their overall performance compared to their norm than the middle of the order guys.
Definitely makes sense. And, for me, I found a lot of edge with the negatives. I thought that, if I'm picking a bottom of the order guy for this tournament and the first, the leadoff, when it was like Jose Reyes or whatever, when he gets out, I not only are we even now with the potential at bats, but now he has a negative, and he's doing even worse than the guys that I had in my lower owned stack. So that's something that definitely disappointed me, because that's how I played a lot of the times. I would find value in, like a Kevin Kiermaier at the bottom of a stack or something like that, where like definitely an upside, not the best, but like players like that. But I think there's something funny to mention is your boy Kyle Seager from Seattle just hit a home run,
Hey.
and Hosmer from my example before just hit a home run. So that literally just happened within the past 5 minutes, I think.
I told you, stack those Mariners. I was talking today. That's what I meant.
Yeah, that's and I was talking today too. But yeah, man, that's great. So there's a question: do you ever consider in the bigger field, 20,000 plus fields on a night where a pitcher will be highly owned? Do you stack the team he's going up against, even if the team isn't that good? So if there's a high owned pitcher, will you stack the opposing team in the large tournaments?
So that's one. I know people that do that, and I know people that tout that. I personally don't do that, because I wouldn't say I wouldn't do it. It's not like it's something I won't do, but there's always going to be stacks that are underowned, and the potential, the percentage chance of a potential benefit of you getting positive while everyone else is getting negative from the rare time that a Kershaw or a Sale or someone gets hit around is so small compared to the chance that you find some other stack against a middle of the road pitcher that's so underowned that your bonus for getting them already outweighs whether everyone's pitcher has a good game or not. I don't know if that makes sense the way I said it.
You want to just elaborate a little bit more?
Yeah. So basically, I'm going to rank teams. Who might I want to stack today without thinking about anyone else's ownership? So I've got this list of 10 teams that I want to stack. And then I come to it and I say, okay, so Chris Sale is going to be 60% owned tonight. If the team that Chris Sale is facing is not one of the 10 teams on my list as a stack, I'm still not going to use that team against him, because one of those 10 teams that I have is already going to be very contrarian. So I'm already gaining an edge over the field if I use that contrarian stack. I don't want to reach for a team that I didn't already like just to try to go against other people's pitcher.
Okay, definitely makes sense.
And if I think Sale shouldn't be 60% owned, I'll be using a different pitcher anyway who I'm expecting to outscore him. So I don't even need Sale to have a negative point game for me to win that.
You're already pivoting, just not using him.
Right. So I totally understand why people do that. Like, I don't think it makes some sense game theory wise. That's just not something that I personally do.
Oh, okay. And when it comes to looking at MLB DFS, I'm basically primarily stats. I set up spreadsheets. I look at fan graphs and all this different kind of statistical information, and I try to find correlations of which pitchers are like this, which pitchers are like that, and that's just how I look at things through advanced stats. Can you just let us know maybe how you approach the game? Do you do it through stats? Do you just look and kind of know the players? And what is your research process like?
Yeah, so I would say I'm a little different than a lot of DFS players in that I was a baseball guy before I got into DFS. And I still playing season long seriously. Like, I'm fully engrossed in baseball stats year round. So when the season starts, I already know. I've already been looking at baseball stats for 3 months.
Right.
And so I sort of look at a slate first, just from a big picture perspective. I have, certain things that I know about guys, certain things that I think about guys or have seen from watching games. And then I go into the stats and see if what I thought matches up with the numbers. And usually it does. And when it doesn't match up is when I look for, who's right here. Because the two situations are, I can look at something before I look at the stats and say, this is a great play today. And then I look at the numbers, and the numbers say it's actually not a great play. And then the other side is I can look at something and say, I don't like this play at all. And the numbers say it is a good play. So when I see something that what I think is different than what I see in the numbers, and more importantly, what everyone else is going to see in the numbers, that's when I sit down and figure out, is it possible that everyone else is going to be reading these numbers, but these numbers are simply wrong today? Because maybe this guy's hurt, or maybe there's something wrong with his curveball that is not going to show up in the numbers, or he's on a hot streak that's real, like he's just hitting the ball with authority right now, or he's just gotten bad luck on the BABIP in the last couple of weeks. So there are times when I can find some advantage when what I think about a game doesn't match the numbers, and then I can find a reason why. Okay. But with all that said, usually the numbers are right.
So what kind of stats do you prefer to look at in terms of all right, I'm picking a pitcher, and I'm picking against a pitcher, because right here, two things that you have is bad pitching is easier to predict than good hitting, and bad teams versus bad pitching.
Yeah, so essentially that simple statement that bad pitching is the easiest thing to predict is true.
How do you find that? How do you find bad pitching?
Stat-wise, there's several things that make a pitcher bad. One is a really low strikeout rate. Like occasionally there's a pitcher that can get by with a low strikeout rate if he's got great control, maybe a lot of ground balls or something. But generally, you want to go against guys who just give up a lot of hits, give up a lot of contact. The ground ball, fly ball thing is a little dependent on the actual pitcher and the ballpark and a lot of other things, but in tournaments, you're going to need home runs. A really heavy ground ball pitcher is tough to play against in tournaments, especially if he doesn't give up a lot of walks.
Right.
Pitchers who walk a lot of guys are always susceptible to a bad game. And then I also look at hard hit percentage. That's sort of a stat that a lot of people are starting to use. Exit velocity is another one. Yeah. A year or two ago, these were sort of unknown stats.
Yeah, I've been using hard hit percentage since I started. That's like one of the things I really base everything on.
They're pretty much in the mainstream now. I think a majority of players look at that. But I think it's certainly relevant. I mean, obviously, if a guy's giving up hard contact and another guy is not, I mean, who do you want, of course?
Right.
So I think it seems like most people are looking at the same basic stats. Like I don't think there's some hidden stat out there that people don't know about. It's just a matter of figuring out how you sort through it.
Right.
And you got to kind of find your own comfort level with how much time do you have and how many stats do you want to look at. If you've got a limited amount of time, you can't dig into every single split of every single batter on a slate. So you got to have something to start with, which would be the basic, strikeout rate, hard hit rate. WOBA's popular for good reason, for just like a quick one look at.
Do you like to look at batter discipline, like outside, inside the zone swing percentage, contact rate, and swinging strike percentage?
I rarely get into. I usually just do straight strikeouts and walks. When you start looking at swings outside of the zone, and then you've got to match up. Where does this pitcher throw, and what kind of pitch versus a swinging outside the zone? Like you're on to 12 hours of research now to do that right. And I think to cherry pick here and there, which is dangerous. Like I think if you're going to use
a lot of noise,
something like that, you got to use it and use it for everybody.
Right. Yeah. So I'll look more towards just a straight up contact percentage, and I would look at the swinging strike percentage. The other stuff I kind of just have and I have it like formatted. So if I see anything bright red or bright green, I kind of know like one way or the other. All right, if this guy, makes everybody miss in every position, like that someone just will pop up to me. But for the most part, contact percentage mixed with hard hit percentage and swinging strike percentage for me, you could kind of correlate all of them. And, you know, if you have someone who's not giving up a ton of contact, the hard hit or the soft percentage, whichever one you're looking at, hard hit is, you know, it's up, and they have a very low swinging strike percentage. You know, like when they throw a strike, it's the percentage of time someone swings and miss. I find a lot of correlation between batting and pitching there, where, you know, I'll match up a pitcher who's getting hit hard with a batter who hits hard. And then when it comes to batters, I like to find players with very low swing and miss, and pitchers with very high swing and miss. And then the contact, you could just kind of, you know, extrapolate the data yourself and figure out, you know, if this guy's getting hit a ton, of course, it's bad. So I like to look at those things, of course, with, you know, 2 season long and then recent. So I'll look at a pitcher, and especially in terms of BABIP. I like to see what their career is and what they are now. So if I see someone who has a career hard hit percentage around 28, and now they're at 34 for the whole season, they've changed an approach maybe negatively, and, you know, you could look at that vice versa. Or maybe he has an injury and he's just leaving the ball over the plate. So I do find indicators looking through those based on just, you know, swinging strike percentage, hard hit percentage, and contact percentage. I think there's a lot to be looked into those on even just first glance kind of numbers.
Yeah, those are very good stats, and I agree with what you said on those.
Cool. I mean, it seems like, you know, your knowledge of baseball in general just surpasses probably anyone even listening. So I'm trying to just dig into, you know, for people who are really learning and just starting, what are just the best things to kind of look at as indicators of performance? And, you know, we mentioned BABIP, and that's a luck stat. You know, if someone has a very low BABIP, it means they've been unlucky, compared to high BABIP, which is, you know, pretty lucky, depending on what their career numbers are, of course. But when it comes to like strikeout percentage, and you know, we have ERA, we have Sierra, we have FIP and xFIP, and all these different things that monitor performance, WHIP, walks and hits per innings pitched. Are there any maybe 2 or 3 that you think is just the most important as indicators of good or bad pitching?
Yeah, if you're new and trying to figure out what stats to do for pitchers, the things I would definitely look at first are strikeout percentage, walk percentage, and Sierra. Sierra is an estimator of what your ERA should be if all your luck was evening out. There's a bunch of ERA estimators, FIP and xFIP. I think Sierra I think it's the best out of them if you're just going to look at one. So just those 3 numbers will tell you want a pitcher who's striking out guys, who's not walking guys. And you see a real ERA that's high and a Sierra that's low, that means he's pitching better than what it looks like, and vice versa. And that's a real easy, quick thing to look at. If a guy's ERA is 4.50 and his Sierra is 3, almost certainly he's just had bad luck and he's going to improve. And that's a quick, easy thing to look at.
And then you'll check the BABIP, see if that's high, and just a couple of quick correlators to that you could look at, like, all right, this is going on, I assume this is going on, and then you can go look, and, you know, he probably would have the high BABIP in that.
Yeah, 95% of the time in that situation with the Sierra, he's either got a really high BABIP or a really high home run to fly ball percentage. Mm-hmm. Almost every time it's one of those or both. And, you know, occasionally, yeah, maybe the guy's hurt and we don't know it, or there's something wrong with his stuff. But for the most part, those are going to even out. And that Sierra is close to where he's going to end up.
All right, great. Thanks. I think that's a nice quick dive into some stats and just a brief overview of things to look for. We have one more question from the chat, and then I just have a question about how you see like platoons from. Actually, I'll ask mine first so I don't lose it. When looking at like a pitcher and platoon splits on the opposite side, a pitcher is very good against righties, K rate, very bad against lefties, and the opposite team is a little bit of mix of both. Are you really just looking for, all right, I hope he strikes out all the righties I need to and grounds out with all the lefties kind of thing. How worried are you about opposing player platoon splits?
Okay, so two things on that. The first thing on platoon splits, you need a really big sample size before they're really that real. So if you see a guy with these big platoon splits and he's only got 40 innings against righties and 20 innings against lefties, you don't really have enough sample to overreact to that data. But if you do have a long sample, if you've got a guy that's been pitching for 5 years and he's very clearly, like you said, he's good against righties, he's bad against lefties. If you really want to dig into it, which sometimes I do, you can actually take the opposing team's lineup batter by batter and look at their strikeout rate versus that handed as a pitcher.
Right.
And see.
Well, let's simplify even more.
Okay.
Right? So maybe not the splits and the stats themselves, just handedness matchups. A pitcher's good against righties, he's bad against lefties. Just in general, or not even. Let's just erase that. Just a righty pitcher against a righty lefty mix. Like, do you try to avoid lefties as the righty pitcher? Do you really care that much if a team tries to load up the lefties? Like, how do you react to just handedness splits or platoons just in general?
Okay, so essentially, if it's an elite pitcher, like a superstar, I don't care. I believe your Kershaws and your Sales and your Scherzers, if they're on, everyone's getting out that day, regardless of anything. If I'm using a cheaper pitcher, I do care if the other team really loads up on the other hand.
Like your Mariners will do.
Yeah. If it's a team usually has 7 righties and 2 lefties, and they stack up 7 lefties and 2 righties that day, and he's not a great pitcher, I do care about that.
Okay.
But if it's they just put in 1 or 2 extra lefties and their lineup is basically the same, don't overreact to it.
All right. That's what I was asking. Like, if you just see, like, all right, because some maybe a switch hitter will come in, or they'll put an extra lefty or two. You'll see a DH or something. Like, there's no reason to really avoid it, but just keep cognizant maybe of who it is.
Yeah. There's a couple of teams that will just completely switch their lineup for certain pitchers, but most of the time we're just talking 1 or 2 guys moved in or out, where the overall matchup, you shouldn't be totally taking a pitcher out of your lineup based on that. Okay.
And one more thing is National League, right? When you have someone batting 8th in front of a pitcher, would you take someone like, let's say they're bare minimum, they just have okay splits, but they're just in that position. Do you think that it's worth taking them to maybe hope for, a walk or 2 being in front of the pitcher, that the other team might just give it to them and say, take your base, I'm going to pitch against the pitcher? Do you think that's a viable strategy at all?
If it's minimum salary or basically minimum salary and you need a punt to fill in your lineup, I'm fine with that, because walks do count, and walks are somewhat predictable
and can turn into runs or steals or something.
Yeah. It's not exciting to play for a walk, but sometimes you just need a cheap guy, and there's not a leadoff hitter who's minimum salary, and you can look at a guy and say, he's probably going to get me some positive points today.
Right. And especially when, we're not even dealing with negatives anymore. So, like, everything's positive. You just want to get on the board at this point.
Yeah. So, that situation is helped by no negatives. If he's a guy that, if he gets pitched too hard, he's probably going to strike out. But they might pitch around him. You're not losing anything on that strikeout. Yeah,
exactly. So that's just something I was thinking, because last year I used to do that a lot with the Cubs. So you would have like Addison Russell. Sometimes they would put him 8th, sometimes 9th. You would get that from maybe like Goins when they would face teams that had that. So there's just certain times that I didn't even really know what I was doing until later, and I was like, wow, this guy, he had a walk today. I didn't really expect much from him. I was hoping he would just be a part of a stack or something. So I kind of found that out just playing around with different types of strategies, and realized. And this is from someone who doesn't know the game of baseball. So I was looking at it like, wow, this guy's in front of a pitcher. Like, he seems to get walked more than the other guys, and it's almost on purpose sometimes.
Yeah, definitely.
So you're kind of getting free points from almost bare minimum guys.
Right.
All right. So the last question in the cash, and then we'll let you run, is how do you approach days with Kershaw, or someone like Kershaw, the elite chalk of the day? I find myself so far fading him every time because of price. I feel like I'm not going to get 70 plus each start.
Okay. There's two different kind of days in baseball. There's Coors Field days and there are not Coors Field days. So that is actually two different questions. On not Coors Field days, I almost always play Kershaw in cash 100% of the time. There's nothing in the game that's predictable other than ace pitchers are fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
That's all that we actually know is going to happen today. Like,
so you'll go cheap everywhere.
There's no such thing as guaranteed points from a hitter. Like it just doesn't exist. And there are pitchers that every once in a while, yes, a Kershaw will have a couple of bad starts, but and that's another thing, Kershaw's bad start is still 15 points, whereas most people's bad start is negative 15. So yes, I am a pay for that ace if he's really an ace and has a good matchup. Most days I don't even think about it. I lock Kershaw in and I'll figure out what to do.
Right. I'll go find a whole bunch of cheap hitters and get them in my lineup.
But now on a Coors Field day, if the prices are bumped up, that changes things, because the next most guaranteed thing in baseball to an ace pitcher is Coors Field. They'll have, they have a handful of games. Last night was one where they don't go high scoring, but compared to every other ballpark, it's as close to a sure of a thing with hitting as you can get. So I think it's simply wrong not to have some Coors bats in cash games. Mm-hmm. It's a different thing than fading them in tournaments. In cash games, you've got to get some hitters. So if the prices are such that you can't afford Kershaw and Coors Field bats, then it depends on who the other pitchers are.
Right, and if there are other options.
Yeah. So if you can find a mid-range Michael Wacha type guy who's 8,500 that you're comfortable with, and that gets you Coors Field bats in, that's when I'll avoid using Kershaw. But for the most part,
I've had some success this season, the past week or two, with finding like 6,000 to 7,500 pitchers, 6,000 to 7,500 guys who are in good matchups. Primarily, they were people playing Phillies and Padres and stuff like that. But I found that with the rule changes, the no negatives, that there's so much upside with hitting now that I've been getting, pitching that's almost what the elite guys were getting. But I also have, I have so much money to spare for all of these guys that have just nothing but upside everywhere, and there's no negatives, and everything you do, as long as you get that at bat in a good matchup, like you're in a prime spot.
Yeah. So the start of this season has seen a lot of aces struggle, mm-hmm. which is why a lot of new players are coming in and going, you're not supposed to pay for these aces. Right. Because this season so far, the aces generally have not worked out. But there is also 40 years of data that says you should probably pay for the aces. So, I still think it's right to pay for the aces, and they're going to catch up. But although some of them, maybe there's something wrong with. I mean,
right.
You have to be careful.
The pricing is definitely off. Yeah. You could see that the pricing's off in terms of just early season stuff and who's playing well and which spots. And there's going to be pitchers going up and pitchers going down. But when it comes to the ace guys, like over a long-term sample size, like this could just be small sample of them doing bad. And moving forward, I think it's easier for the hitters at this point than it is for the pitchers, because they're not really even in any kind of swing for pitching or rotation yet. So I think once the aces really get out there, and I think it's gonna go back to pay up for the ace and everything, and people are gonna keep using that strategy, but maybe stacking cheaper players and not going for all the Toronto bats and everything this early in the season.
Yep.
But Dave, thank you so much for this interview. I really, really appreciate you spending the time, taking the time to do this with us. Guys, once again, this is xBenJamminx from Daily Roto Sharks, and Dave Potts, aka Cheese is Good, from Rotogrinders.com. Dave, thank you so much. I'd like to say bye to everybody.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, no problem, man. I really appreciate that a lot. So take care, and thanks for spending time with us.
Okay, see you.